Hello and welcome to Tuesdays with Morrissey. I'm your host, Adam Morrissey. Today I'm thrilled to be joined by my friend and guest, William Linn. I've been waiting for this conversation for a while. William's a PhD and practicing mythologist in California. Dr. Linn was a philosophy major at Sewanee, and he worked at the Campbell Institute and earned a PhD in mythology and deep psychology at Pacific Graduate Institute. William is now the founder of the Mythology channel and has had the opportunity to be featured in many documentaries, as well as consulted for groups outside the philosophy community, including business ventures, entertainment industry, productions, etc. What I'm really excited to learn today is about how some of these ideas from mythology influence the world we live in, probably some in subtle ways, others in less subtle ways. But before we do that, I'd be curious to learn how you got into this field. After all, I'm sure there's a portion of the population that don't even know there are practicing mythologists out there today.
Thanks, Adam, and thanks for inviting me. I've been looking forward to it as well. Myth is a weird thing to get into. I got into it personally because I was a second semester senior in college, finishing my philosophy major, and there was a Greek mythology class I could take after lunch on Friday, and it was a great story time. And that's all I was expecting. But as I'm sitting there, I'm hearing stories about how Prometheus is awakening clay with fire. And I'm hearing the same philosophical conversation from my philosophy class, the separation of mind and body, where you have this distinct idea of consciousness here, body there, here's fire, here's clay. And then I'm like, oh, wait a minute, there's Adam and Eve, right? With clay and breath, and there's the two. And all of a sudden it clicks for me. And it takes about 6 months, but and a trip to Greece and reading a book by Joseph Campbell. But what I ultimately really start to get is that the same stuff we think about intellectually, philosophically, translates, and this is so obvious, but I was so thick, translates into metaphor, translates into imagery. And when that clicked for me, I realized that I could continue to pursue my study of philosophy through the study of myth, kind of taking it to the whole other side of my brain. And then this basically was also something that I could use to deepen my storytelling, deepen my work as a creative. I realized that the study of myth is the study of the world's most powerful stories, is the study of what makes the most powerful stories so powerful. So anything that you want to bring the power of story to, studying myth is like studying the really powerful stuff. And so I wanted to tell stories. I wanted to study philosophy, and studying myth for me was a convergence of the two.
Excellent. Yeah, I remember I had a little bit of a mythology awakening. It kind of sparked really my career in reading in about 10 years ago, just out of school. I think I got my hand, is it Percy's series on Greek myths.
I haven't read that one. Really Percy Jackson?
Yeah, Percy Jackson.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, actually, a graduate from my school wrote the screenplay, the same myth PhD. Yeah,
I got really taken by the stories of Perseus and Theseus in particular, and then that kind of I can trace my entire reading career back to there. So really awesome. People think and hear myths and they think about, Greek mythology. Are there any misconceptions about myths today?
It started out, myth, of course, was religion, so one person's myths, another person's religion. And this leads us to start to see myths as lies when we say that religion's wrong, and this is a false truth or something like that. But what happened with the history of myth, especially in the Western world, is that the Christian church, first of all, the classical world, the Roman world, adopted Christianity, converted to Christianity, and there was this incredible convergence of classical philosophies and mythologies kind of paving the way for what made Christianity so accepted, believe it or not. Then, after Christianity was so solidified in the world, it started pushing out the pagan religion as false religion. After Catholicism had consolidated power in Europe, it then supported the bringing back of Greek myth as literature. And then inside of its schools as part of the syllabi. So then it comes back as literature. Well, now we get all the way, now it's consolidating the literature of a culture and is helping create shared identities and nation around all this history. It's combining into a single narrative and a single collective that will become the Western identity. But now our responsibility is to extend the identity beyond the Western world and not just look at Greek myths, and start looking not just for truth in Greek myth or Christian myth or even in the mythology of science, but to start looking at all the myths all over the world and start to see what's consistent throughout them. So that's the main thing we do in the PhD program at Pacifica is we look at Greek myth next to Chinese myth, next to Buddhism, next to, and not to try to find out what's the same, but to try and see what's resonant, what's consistent, what lessons echo. And in some cases, there's a lot of consistency. For example, a lot of leaders in this community of religion and mythology, from the Dalai Lama to Karen Armstrong, are pretty stuck on the idea that most of these traditions support love as a core thing, and in all kinds of mythic motifs all over the world. So you start doing the comparative stuff and you start saying whose truth is wrong or right. Skip that. What's consistently true for all of them?
Yeah, interesting. And do you find, the stories deep into cultures shape and change the way people look at the world?
Oh, that's the question. That's exactly the question that until you ask that question, you can't even get into myth. It's exactly that. It's like the story of Perseus, for example, a favorite of yours, right? So here's this story of a woman is this horrible Medusa in the Perseus story of this woman is this horrible monster that when she looks at you will turn you to stone. And this is actually related to all kinds of expressions of the same consistent way of seeing the world, where we see the world as dead matter. And the feminine is associated with the matter. M-A-T-E-R, mater is the word for mother, and matter. And we see it in a hypermasculine reality that we live in now, in the hypermasculine myths that come from Eve and Pandora. We see the mater, the matter, is this dead material stuff. And then the soul, the spirit, is this living stuff. And that's the pater. P-A-T-E-R is father and pattern, right? So we differentiate between mind and body, or pattern and matter, but we always put the feminine on the side of matter. And the matter is what we get the body from, which is what gives us emotion, which is where we become illogical. And that's all the stuff that the hypermasculine mythologies repress. And you see it in the demonization of figures like Medusa. You see it in the demonization of figures like Eve and Pandora. This is programming that we don't even realize is happening to us. And it happens with new myths too, new stories too. They program us and reprogram us to see the world a certain way through these associations. So you associate the feminine with monster and with matter and with dead matter. And you're going to start to trigger that in people. People are going to start treating women like that seductive matter that's responsible for seducing us into the world and making us suffer.
Yeah, I mean, you think about it all the time, how much of our own perspective we bring to anything we consume and interact with. Oftentimes you'll read the same thing and people will have radically different reactions and insights following it. In what ways is mythology and these concepts, interacting and in our world today, and I'm thinking about, business, entertainment, ways that are maybe more recognizable?
The first thing you said, I want to comment on before answering the second one, which is like, you ever been in a relationship where somebody's been hurt in a certain way in the past, and they no matter what you do, they're going to see you as a certain way until you just patiently work through that insecurity and that anxiety and show them, yep, you're not the person that they're afraid you are. But they're afraid based on a story they've lived before. And they're afraid that they're going to live that story again. And they're recasting the old stories of their trauma into their projections of what they're seeing happening in the dramas they're in now. And what happens is we get caught in other people's stories and other people's myths. We're all living myths already. We live in a myth. Nobody lives in the world. We all live in our stories of the world.
I see it a lot in the sales world too. Like, you'll go to a person with an idea. And one of the things I've learned, sometimes the hard way, is you can't always control what experience people have had before you. And we're so quick to put things in boxes. So anything that seems like, looks like, smells like, they try to put it in this box with all the associated scar tissue that comes with their past experience.
Exactly. And then a good artist and a good storyteller knows how to draw on that. Oh, you've had the whole world erupt on you before out of nowhere and you didn't see it coming. That's a trauma that's there. Now you've got to be afraid that could happen again. What if here's my product that can keep the world from erupting on you, right? So
we have a common enemy.
Exactly. And So when you can speak to people's stories. But another example in marketing is these marketing archetypes, where you try to identify the stories that people are already in, so that you sell to the story they're in. So this is where you get stuff like the rebel archetype. And now you'd start seeing marketing campaigns that are like, leave the world behind, be free. Well, that's based on mythological studies of archetypal characters that become marketing archetypes. And then we start to market towards these mythic characters that are also living archetypal characters. And these are stories. Same thing with, like, Venus, beauty, love, seduction. Well, you see the Venus commercials, but you also see herbal essences, or you see uh, uh, Victoria's Secret commercials. These are all advertising to the identity that is configured just like the identity of Venus around beauty and love. So when you can appeal to these archetypes, each character within us is living a difference. If you watch Westworld, every hat comes with a story. Every character comes with a story. You put on the mask, you put on the hat, you live the story. So we sell to the story or to the mask that they're in.
Yeah. Have you had a chance to work on many marketing or branding campaigns? Are there any that stand out to you?
My favorite ones are I can't talk about, but but yeah, for sure. What's super interesting, I'll just say, is working with musicians, because musicians are not fundamentally boxed into a specific medium. It's not like working with a documentarian where it's like, let me help your outline for your documentary. When you work with a musician, it's like they have a campaign. They're coming out with an album. They're going to have 4 or 5 music videos. They're going to have a bunch of merchandise. They're going to have concerts. They're going to have apps. They're going to have anything they can think of to sell around their brand and the story. So the story is fundamentally beyond any one piece of media. And so you have to get all of those pieces of media to fit one narrative experience. Meanwhile, you're trying to think backwards from the the customer's journey. The customer comes to it. Where is the customer when they first see the product? How do you hook the customer and surprise them? How do you call them in? How do you get them to commit to crossing a threshold? Most of sales is the first third of the journey, which is the call to the point of commitment.
Yeah, the refusal of the call and then return. Very good. Do you think we're in some sort of mythic renaissance in our world today? I think about business and film. Some of the titans that are created in the startup world, or some of the themes that are infiltrating. I think about the Marvel movies. In some cases, I watch these things and I'm like, wow, like these themes definitely weren't around when I was watching these movies as teenagers and the like.
I mean, I have chills you even asked the question, like 1,000%. I mean, honestly, 100 years ago, you have Andre Breton saying that the imagination is put into a box, basically, and he pushes for surrealism to break causality. And then you see in Logic, and you see Tolkien saying fairy tales are relegated to the nursery. At the same time, kids are saying, or parents are telling their kids, comic books are for kids. So all this is, fairy tales are myths or lies, and fairy tales are for children. This is all degrading the imagination as unreal, as not true. But that is all based in some old anchoring perspectives of the Enlightenment, materialism, literalism, stuff that we're otherwise beyond. And so what I think you're seeing with Marvel and Star Wars and, Lord of the Rings, now the biggest stuff there is. Now it goes from relegated to the nursery to the biggest mainstream. Yeah, there's a revival of the adult imagination. The adult cares now about these imaginal things.
Well, I even think about it. You see it a lot in business ventures too. I had a guest a couple of weeks ago that was saying, he thinks that in the next couple of decades, all entrepreneurship will have an element of social entrepreneurship.
Oh, I think that's actually another thing I've seen, that's a shift in our world. That has to do with the fact too, with it really matters. Boycotts really matter. People, social, you really have to care about that more than you did 10 years ago. You really can get canceled as a whole company. That's a really big deal. Meanwhile, you've got like the head of Microsoft, or the CEO of Microsoft, wrote this book, Rediscovering the Soul of Microsoft, and he's using Campbell's hero's journey, talking about how that's part of how they're doing it. You've got Obama referencing it. I think basically now we're at this point where one story is so influential. One of our family friends was the head of PR for Coca-Cola when Coca-Cola moved its marketing to Hollywood. That's the whole story right there. Is that why does Coca-Cola move its marketing to Hollywood? Because Hollywood's the center of telling story, and telling story is the center of selling your product and succeeding as a corporation. Story is the tip of the spear for your whole corporation, for everything, for your brand, for your CEO's identity, for it all. So mastering and being ahead of the narrative is kind of the ultimate battleground, and people have figured it out.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, that story, that's they moved their marketing budgets from McCann Erickson to CAA.
Amazing.
Yeah, incredible. I'm a big. I really enjoyed Michael Ovitz's memoir, Who is Michael Ovitz, on the Game of Hollywood. So, that's really cool. When you say, people have really figured it out, could you elaborate a little bit on that?
Well, it went from being like, Joseph Campbell being a secret weapon to Joseph Campbell being taught it as a 101, piece of every marketing degree and every PR degree or communications degree, every film school. It's now in the storytelling education. Now these breakthroughs are now integrated. The Hero with 1,000 Faces is one of the 500 most assigned books in the English language. Secret is out. The Power of Myth was the most successful interview series in PBS history. And Star Wars is now no longer the only big franchise pulling weight, pointing to it either.
For folks that don't know, and I never worked at the Campbell Institute, but I'll do my best. Or I guess I'd love to hear from you. If you had to put it really simply, I'm familiar with Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. How would you describe it really simply? And if you could use some examples from, things that people would know, whether it's Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, Harry Potter, I'd love to hear it in your words.
Sure. I'll tell you two-part. One, what is it? And then two, I'll try and do a short version of it. But first of all, what is it is like the Socratic method is a process for getting somebody to go from doubting to deconstruct, or to go from thinking something to thinking something else. That's hard. There is nothing harder than getting somebody to go from thinking this to thinking that. And that's what the hero's journey really is a study of. That's what myths are really a study of. That's what the Socratic method really was. How do you take somebody from here to there? And so that's what our dreams are doing. They're trying to take us from here to there. And so our dream sequences, by looking at how our dreams move us, we can also understand how myths and stories can move us from here to there. So the hero's journey comes from a study of the most powerful stories of all time and what they've done to move people internally. And so what does that look like? Short version, super short version. Character starts out in the status quo. They think what they already think. They are dug into what they already think. They're probably even defensive about thinking something else. There is a collective perspective that is what they should think. And they're comfortable in those thoughts. Then something comes and disrupts that, so much so that they now have increased awareness. They can't just go back to thinking what they were thinking. This is an inciting incident or a call to adventure that asks the dramatic question of can we save the day? Then the character's like, I don't know, that sounds really scary and I don't want to change. Changing sounds bad. I actually, you know what? I know that I was thinking I had to change, but forget that. And then we're going to have to find some kind of overcoming factors, a mentor or a lightsaber, right? So we go from Frodo saying, I'm not going to leave the Shire. Forget that, Gandalf, and then we have, him show up with these things, these special tools that will help him to do it. Then finally, the character's like, all right, I'll eat the pill and I will cross the threshold. I'll go down the rabbit hole and I will, go through the wardrobe and enter into or exit the Matrix. And the first thing that happens when you leave, when you cross the threshold and you go, this is our end of Act 1, which is, by the way, the commitment. And so if you're trying to sell something, Act 1 is the sale. How do I get them to go from home to committing to go on the journey? So mostly Act 1 is, and if you see something like Brand Journey, it's so interesting. What he's done is he's retrofit all of the whole journey into an Act 1. He's programmed all of the journey, part 2 and 3, as a foreshadowing hinted at in Act 1, so that the whole journey is just selling you to buy, just to cross the threshold.
Yeah, there's a level of induction in Act 1, so it's familiar and resonates in Act 2 and beyond.
Exactly. So the short version is, when now you've committed, you've bought the thing, you're like, I'm going to do the thing. I'm going to start the company. I'm going to go on the campaign. The first thing that happens once I'm going to make a movie. First thing that happens once you actually decide to do it is all the things that you've had to block out to tell yourself it's a good idea. How hard it actually is going to come flooding in. And this is a thing that helps us to prepare, because this is why this is good for leadership training, because leaders need to know the second that you decide to actually do it is exactly when you're going to feel overwhelmed and flooded. Don't despair. Super normal. That's exactly how it goes. But then you go, this is Neo throwing up just after Morpheus has told him the truth. Neo throws up, right? That's the standard. The great motif is, this is the moment you're swallowed by the whale into the underworld, and that is to feel swallowed. As soon as you make the commitment, you feel swallowed. Okay, then you're on the journey, you're learning, you're getting rid of your old way of seeing things, is deconstructing, while your new tools, your new skills, you're learning how to use magic like Harry Potter, your webs like Spider-Man, your force, whatever it is you're learning, you're now learning your new skills. You go to a school, to a program, you're learning your new skills, or you've, bought some cool software that's going to help you do something. Now you're learning how to actually use it. You're building your super suit. You're building your Iron Man outfit, whatever. Then, though, that's all fun and games, as Blake Snyder would call it. That's all great. You're growing, you're exploring, you're expanding. But then, unfortunately, there's a plot you have to get back to. Boom. Then all of a sudden you lose control. A midpoint comes. You think you're going to go save Leia, but actually, Alderaan is destroyed, and you get grabbed by a tractor beam and totally lose control. But what's actually going on in Harry Potter in the exact midpoint of the first movie? He's jerked around all over his broom. You think that's a coincidence that Harry Potter's on his broom without any control, while they're in their spaceship without any control in the dead middle of these movies? No, the reason why is because that's the right narrative moment. There is a moment where you go from building and growing to thinking you're going to follow the plan you have, to then you show up to execute that plan. I like the never-ending story. He gets to where he thinks he's going to find out the truth of the nothing, and he just gets to the turtle, and he just starts rolling back down the turtle's shell, being told that he's going to have to go to the other side of the universe, or the other side of Fantasia. He's not where he thought he was. So this is the midpoint twist. We now all of a sudden plan's broken, deconstruction. This is when all the Neo's told that he's not the one. What? I thought the whole time I'm supposed to be the one. Then the team starts breaking down, dropping like flies, leading us into the nadir. The nadir is when we're about to totally lose it all. We're about to pull the plug out from under Morpheus, and this is the moment when we need to see the real hero come forward. This is when the mentor is going to die or be threatened. This is when Obi-Wan dies. But as long as Obi-Wan's around, Luke can't be the leader, and a hero's got to become the leader. This is when Gandalf has got to die or disappear, because you can't be a leader with Gandalf around. That's the mentor around, right? So that's what's going to happen is Morpheus is now put aside, and now Neo has to choose. I will sacrifice myself. And that's the ultimate choice. I will sacrifice myself. That's nirvana, to be extinguished, to be Anatman, no self. And it's when he finally is willing to sacrifice his self that he begins becoming the one. This is the elixir he needs, the holy grail, the holy cup. And now he's going to go back and deliver it to save the day, transform into this new self, become reincarnated in the process, a new body, a new being, representing that this person, whether it's a person going through a life change or a customer becoming a new entity, you're going to become somebody new. Because of the journey that you've been on. And only because you're now this new person can you save the day, respond to the problem. And you save the problem, redeeming the wasteland, bringing an end to the problem in your world. And these are just super backwards, logical, reverse engineered steps of logic, just kind of a logic sequence that you have to go through, but in narrative and mythological terms.
Yeah. I was like, and then you just end up right where you started. I like how the Lord of the Rings guys, they start in the Shire and they end up back in the Shire drinking beers with their friends. You mentioned sales, you mentioned leadership. Why is this framework kind of a two-part question? Just because I'm curious to how you'll weave this. Why is it so important to have a sense of where you are in this framework? And then the second part, and I'll leave it to you to kind of hear if you think this is that related, but some of these stories, why do we care? Why? And when I say why do we care, why are we so moved by these stories over and over and over again, even as you've explained, whether it's Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, The Matrix, 4 of them I picked up on um, in your explanation. There's so many similarities. How are they so recurrently uh, potent?
I think that there are a few answers to that, but one is it's really self. Because ultimately, if we're going to be born into this world, we're on a journey of becoming all that we can be. And these journeys, what they're about is they take us from a place where we're limiting all that we can be. We're in our comfort zone and we're staying in this place that's just a limited amount of what we can be. But we all actually want to be more than we're limiting ourselves. The rest of ourselves wants to be lived into. It's like we're all baby oak trees, but we all know there's a lot more oak tree that we could grow into if we, get there. And I think that so we see these journeys and we see the growth, and they're processes of tapping into more than we've tapped into yet. And we all want to do that. So that's part of why I think we're seeing ourselves, we're seeing our growth. And sometimes the self you see is a personal self, and sometimes it's a collective self. Sometimes I see the world's transformation projected. Now I project the whole world transforming into it. But then also, where you are in the story may actually be where you're most sensitive. So if you see somebody, struggling to start the journey, and that's the part that really hooks you, and you find yourself crying at the beginning of the movie to the character that just can't decide to go, it's probably where you might be where you are in at least one of your journeys, Or if you're like, I know I have when you see the character, they've gotten that, the holy thing that they're going to come back, let's say it's golden compass. They've got the antidote that's going to save all the dancing zombies, but there's a resistance to returning. They don't want to go back, and it's scary to go back. Well, if that's the part that's getting you, maybe that's where you are on the journey. Maybe you have the answer, but you're just afraid to go deliver it of the challenge. So normally we project wherever we are internally onto these parts of onto the journey, and the part that hooks us the most tends to represent where we are the most, or the characters that hook us the most. We look for characters that are going to bring out the parts of ourselves that need to grow, and hopefully we don't just spend time looking for characters that are just like us.
Yeah, I think that's definitely can be a phase, though, and it is interesting too when you were talking about like sales leadership. Hey, when you get this job or when you go on the entrepreneurial journey, things are going to come up, things are going to happen. There's going to be obstacles, and you were mentioning that Microsoft was able to trace their own hero's journey using that same framework from Star Wars and Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter and The Matrix to their own company. I just finished Ben Horowitz's The Hard Thing About Hard Things, and he's like, every company's got, I can't remember what the exact term is. It's a funny acronym though, but 2 to 5 real dark night of the soul existential moments where they didn't think they were going to make it.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then I bet you when they go back and they look at those moments, they find out that pretty consistently, whatever they figured out in those moments turned out to be critical. And it wasn't just some accidental, well, then something, whatever it was probably critical. And there's something that's very common in the dark moment. Leading into the dark moment, this is when the moon is going dark, down to the last sliver. So we're losing all the light. We're cutting off the body parts of Osiris. We're down to the 13th piece of Osiris. We've cut it all up. And so this is when the team is down. The company of 13 is now down to 1. All the team is broken up. And one of the things that's happening here, can be happening here, is that a leader can get so inside their own ego that they can alienate their team. And they can, instead of bringing people in to help, they can push people away. And they can actually be so committed to selling the positive spin that nobody believes anything from them anymore, because they won't tell the truth about the hard stuff or the uncomfortable stuff, right? And so that ego's kind of resistance of its deconstruction. So as the ego confronts its deconstruction, it will resist it. off, especially the first time, until you learn that you want your ego deaths and you're going to do your, whatever things people do to achieve ego deaths on their regular Sundays. But besides that, normally you don't want that ego death, so you resist it, and it hardens more, and you drive people away. And you have to learn. One of the lessons of the nadir, of the bottom of the journey, is the ego death. We have to learn to let ourselves go, let our plan go, let our sense of control go. And it's when we because we all try to control everything. When we let go of that control, when we submit, when we extinguish that ego, it is just always illogical how that leads to things. It has to be. It's always a surprise. Something happens when you get to the other side of that submission, and now all of a sudden you just simply couldn't see what was right in front of your face. As the Sufis would say, Sufi mystics, of the Islam mystics, that the dirt on your mirror of your heart is keeping you from reflecting truth as it is. We have to get the dirt off of our heart, or the splinter out of our eye, or the dust from our eye. The ego's got to get out of the way so that we can engage with the world as it is. And normally we won't do that till we're at our most dire moments, and we just give up. We just I give up. There's nothing else I can do. That's the sound of an ego submitting. And then something might happen.
Yeah, I mean, you just in those really difficult moments, it seems like you see a number of things, two of which being the hardening and the self-destruction and the implosion, or the rise of the authentic leader.
Totally. Who is probably authentic based on how open they are with their people. The openness has got to be what's defining that authenticity, not the shell.
Yeah, it was just in one of these case studies from The Hard Thing About Hard Things they were talking about. I think it was that the company name is just escaping me, but they were always in a war period, and they would ask people were working 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, and people look back at that period and that period of rallying around something with great fondness. On the company. What are some things in your world that you're watching today that have a relevance based on where you're spending your time and energy?
I just watched the George Carlin documentary. I don't know if you've seen it come out. His daughter, Kelly Carlin, is a friend. And I find it just so incredible. It's on HBO right now. It just came out. And it's the story of this guy who spends the first part of his life trying to be exactly what the world asks him to be so that he can succeed in that world. And then it's the story of him eventually being like, I can't do this anymore. I can't stuff myself in this shirt. I can't put myself behind this mask anymore. And so many of us get to that point where we're like, I can't live a fake life anymore. I can't be just this surface persona self. And then you follow the story of him just letting all that go and bringing forth and exploring all the rest of what he is. And then it turns into this story of this guy becoming a really complete human being who becomes a force of nature with this comedy. And that's a great mythological role, is the trickster. The trickster is the one who's supposed to pop the shell, who's supposed to crack the egg, who's supposed to poke. And it's really nice if they do it instead of as the Joker trickster, who's so suppressed that they're going to go, do really terrible things, like what we saw, in Texas recently, right? The shootings. Those are people pushed, often repressed to the point, or at least that is their internal experience, repressed to the point of becoming that shadow that's going to disrupt. It's a symptom of repression and collective oppression, at least in their own experience of it. And when we do better is when that cracking through is done not with violence, but with humor. That is when the trickster is a comedian. That we want our tricksters to look more like George Carlin than we want it to look like Joaquin Phoenix's Joker. But it's the same archetypal requirement of certain characters will be those characters that will break our perception of what the world is. And so I'm fascinated by George Carlin right now as this example of a trickster figure. And the reason why I like him is because he's so obviously an idealist. He's not trying to make the world burn. He's trying to deconstruct everything because he wants us to live in the world of our 7th grade civics teacher. He wishes the world were as beautiful as he kind of wishes that it wants it to be. And so I kind of really admire that's a character I'm really sitting with right now. A trickster, a timeless trickster, filled with love, who deconstructs with humor.
Awesome. Cool. I'll have to check that out. Before I let you go, I mean, thank you for all your time today. This has been a really awesome conversation. Any reading material or other content you'd recommend for people interested in the cross section of the work you do and the world they interact with?
Yeah, definitely. I think the go-to is definitely Chris Vogler's Writer's Journey. If nobody's picked that one up yet, that's a book that influenced filmmakers first, but then now it's how they abridge novels and travel guides, and all kind of stuff like that in marketing. So that's the real number one kind of how-to. It takes Campbell's Hero with 1,000 Faces, which is not written for storytellers. It's written for mythologists and religious studies and that kind of stuff, psychology. And it makes it for storytellers. But then the thing is that was written 27, 28 years ago, and there are holes in it. So even though that's still probably the best, people like Blake Snyder's how-to or something like that, I think that Chris Vogler's is still the best for that. However, you should fill in the holes where you can with something like Maria Tatar just came out with a book called Heroine of 1,001 Faces. She's the Dean of Humanities at Harvard and Myth and Folklore chair, their degrees there, and a mentor of mine. Maria's amazing. So Heroine of 1,001 Faces fills in some holes. And so does Hero with an African Face by Clyde Ford. It was recommended by or endorsed by Cornell West. That's an incredible book. So while the monomyth is really powerful, the hero's journey is really powerful. I encourage Writer's Journey as the place to start. I better also encourage you to fill in some of the gaps with Heroine of 1,001 Faces and Hero with an African Face.
Cool. Well, you allude to one of my long questions of whether to read the classics or to read the more modern interpretation that attempts to fill in the gaps. I think to your answer, it might be both.
Yeah.
Appreciate the time today. We'll make sure to include links to those in the episode write-up. But again, thanks for coming on the show.
And always find more stuff when we talk about it monthly on mythhouse.org.
Very good.
Thanks, Adam.
Thanks, William. Cheers.